Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022, and in last night's election, Republicans in Michigan chose Tudor Dixon to be their Republican nominee for the Michigan governor's race this November midterm elections. Now, the Michigan governor's race has been quite interesting on the Republican Party side. When you take a look at their array of candidates, many of them had entered into different positions amongst the primary process that at different points made it seem like someone else was positioned to win the Republican nomination. Taking a look at the Michigan race, you can find that on the Republican side, there actually was a frontrunner prior to Tudor Dixon. Now, that frontrunner was one who had been well established and was likely going to receive the endorsement from many top Republicans as we entered into the final stages of the primary season. But when it came down to the deadline to verify signatures, that frontrunner was disqualified for forging and having illegitimate signatures heading into the election. So as a result, that candidate, James Craig, being the former chief of the Detroit Police Department, we'll talk a bit more about him and why his race, him dropping out or being disqualified, hinders the Republican Party. Him alongside 4 other Republicans were also disqualified. There were 10 Republicans in the race. 5 of them failed to qualify, and the rest decided to not pursue a legal battle. And now we were remaining with the 5 remaining candidates who ended up amongst the ballot that we saw last evening. Now, Tudor Dixon didn't always start out as this Republican frontrunner. The reason why she won largely has to do with President Trump's endorsement, but also the lack of ability for the other remaining Republicans to make a name for themselves in the final stages of the campaign season. Tudor Dixon started out with polling numbers that were in the low single digits in the early stages of the campaign. In 2021, she was polling at just 1%, and then in early 2022, around the time of February, March, May, and June, she was polling at 4, 3, 2, 9, and 5%, until finally claiming a lead for the first time in the beginning of July, right before the primary. Now, when there was a disqualification for James Craig, he was leading the primary polls. As I said, he was the frontrunner, and that was very well established. There was no real reason as to assume why Tudor Dixon would actually end up winning the nomination. But as she started to climb in the polls, Donald Trump made it very clear that he wanted to choose a winner in this race. He had spoken about Tudor Dixon before. He had spoken about her to his closest allies. There were parts that were leaked to the press about how much he liked her, but wasn't willing to endorse her at that point in time. Donald Trump is very careful. He likes to endorse the people that are winning, and at the time, it didn't look like she was going to. But as she started to rise in the polls and became the very clear frontrunner, he ended up endorsing her 3 days before the primary. Well, 3 days before the primary was enough to bump her up to where she is right now, and in last night's election, she received 41% of the vote. Now, the Republican Party dodged a bullet, partially with Tudor Dixon. When you take a look at the list of candidates here, there's actually one that might jump out to you, and his name is Ryan Kelly. Now, he only got 4th place in last night's primary, and that might tell you that he wasn't really the most viable option for the GOP at the first, look. But at different points in the campaign season, Ryan Kelly was actually the frontrunner. Now, the reason why I mentioned his name is because as the frontrunner during that time frame, he was arrested by the FBI for charges on what he did on January 6th. And that actually seemed to have boosted his polls and name recognition. Fox News was covering him. The mainstream media was attacking him, covering him, regardless of, left or right-wing media. Generally speaking, he got negative press because he was arrested by the FBI. They raided his home, they searched everything in his connection to January 6th, and it overall did not paint a positive image. So as the weeks went on, his lead ended up coming into a 4th place position, where now he's losing and lost last night's primary. Tudor Dixon winning 41% of the vote means that there at least was a good amount of support behind her. She won all but 3 counties across the state and is going ahead into the November elections as one of the lesser scathed Republican candidates that we have seen thus far. But Tudor Dixon has taken some very interesting position points, more specifically on the issue of abortion. Now, the reason why I raise that is because the state of Michigan has what is written into their constitution as a complete and total ban on abortion. Tudor Dixon specifically does not support a woman's right to choose. Now, Michigan is not exactly a state that could consider itself pro-life. When you take a look at the polling numbers across the state, they reject the pro-life ideology by about 15, 16 points. Now, that's important because the issue of abortion is now one of the more important ones when it comes down to the state of Michigan and other states across the nation. Tudor Dixon has made some very, very weird comments, I would say, and that's the way to describe them, because I don't think they are what you would normally expect from a Republican nominee or a Republican frontrunner. Yes, I think that Republicans would take a pro-life position, but the position that she has taken is a little bit more extreme than that. Let me give you an example. So when she was asked on a live, recorded, audio recorded as well, interview about specifically a case of a 14-year-old girl who, and we're going to be talking about some very, very sensitive topics here, but she was given the example of a 14-year-old girl who would be, in this scenario, raped by her uncle. And she was asked, should that 14-year-old girl be forced to carry the child to term? And her answer was yes. It was a resounding yes, saying that's a perfect example of when she believes life should be chosen over abortion. She cites that she has friends who were the product of similar, or not friends, but she knows people who are, going to be, they were the result of a situation as unfortunate as that one. And I don't mean to say product, that's the wrong word for it. I was just thinking out loud, or trying to find the right word for it. But looking at that individual soundbite, the opposition research and pushback on Tudor Dixon has only started. Because to be quite honest with you, the Democratic Party probably didn't even think she was a top contender when she was polling at 2%. And rightfully so. There was another frontrunner at the time, and after they had dropped out, Tudor Dixon didn't become the immediate frontrunner. Now that she is the Republican nominee, there is a good amount to attack her on. I also bring up the issue of abortion because after last night's primary results in the state of Kansas, I'm not all that impressed by the Republican Party's ability to strategize and organize behind this issue. Kansas is a state where more Republicans turned out in the 2020 election than Democrats. Donald Trump won by 15 points across the state, and in this specific election, more Republicans turned out by raw vote share than Democrats, significantly higher. And at a bare minimum, 20% of Republicans voted no to keep Kansas a state with abortion access up to 22 weeks. And that up to 22 weeks is really just not important because this issue at stake here in Kansas's referendum was whether or not to remove protections for abortion rights. And they voted no overwhelmingly. So looking at the Michigan governor's race, Tudor Dixon as the nominee, someone who has taken some very extremist positions on the issue of abortion, more so than many other swing state Republicans, the smart play here would be to say, I'm personally pro-life, but I will allow the voters to make a decision through a ballot referendum, which, guess what, Michigan could go ahead and try to do. She could even try to proposition herself to initiate it. But looking at the stances that she has taken, it seems like she chose the most extreme version of this pro-life agenda to stake it onto herself to make herself palatable to those voting in the Republican primary. Studies show that those who vote in primaries are the most extreme people in a political party, and that's what's contributing to this political polarization. Gerrymandering combined with political primaries with low turnout amongst just the most core and extreme portions of a party, and thus you find heads clashing because, hey, the people who got them there in the first place aren't swing voters, aren't independent voters, but rather extremist sides on both sides of the aisle, and that's what's happening in this Michigan primary. Looking at the chances at victory for Tudor Dixon, I think they underestimate her, but I don't think that she's in a very well-positioned point at all when it comes down to this state. 95-5 is probably pushing it, but also I do think that Tudor Dixon is certainly on track to lose. It isn't just me. It isn't just 538. It's the political betting markets, or it's other forecasts that you can take a look at here that show that Gretchen Whitmer has a significantly high chance at winning in 2022. She is one of the most vulnerable governors, or was, I should say, one of the most vulnerable governors at a different point in time in the entire country to lose re-election. And now it looks like she might even be on track based off of the numbers that we see here to win by overwhelming epic proportions for the Democratic Party. Not a single poll shows that Whitmer loses the governor's race against any of the Republicans who were on the ballot last evening, including the Republican winner. And you might be thinking, okay, these polls never would have shown a Republican ahead, right? Well, guess what? They did. Before James Craig was disqualified, he actually pretty consistently, might I add, defeated Gretchen Whitmer in the early stages of the campaign. The most she got against him was 49-39. And even then we knew that that was pushing it. It went back and forth. And yes, Gretchen Whitmer won more polls than lost, but she was tied in some and losing two of them. That is more than any other Republican. Only the generic Republican, quote unquote generic Republican, was able to do it. More than any other Republican who was able to remain in the race. And it shows here that it's narrowing up, but don't let this fool you. This is an 11-point gap. This is a very, very large gap. Don't try to think that this is something that is out of the ordinary. Gretchen Whitmer had a very large lead over Tudor Dixon, and it's quite fascinating to say the least. This lead that has led to a double-digit expected victory by 538 is one that can be kept, but also one that can be sort of taken down from by Tudor Dixon. But at the end of the day, I'm not confident that Dixon wins this governor election, where I was previously confident that Democrats would lose this race in a different type of environment. The issue of abortion becoming a very big mainstream one, as we have seen in Kansas, as we have seen in a number of other races, it won't be more important than inflation or COVID or the economy, because those are things that Americans care about practically the most amongst the past few elections. Take out COVID, obviously, prior to 2020. But looking at the issue of abortion, it has never been this much at stake. In 49 years, Roe v. Wade was put into, it was ruled in 1973 and had remained a precedent for 49 years. No one thought that all of a sudden the Supreme Court in 2022, at least over the past few decades, would be able to overturn it, because it had been tried and tested by courts that some would argue are more conservative than the ones we have today. I don't know if I entirely agree, but that's what many people have said. Looking at this race, I think Whitmer does a very good job at winning re-election. Her approvals are high, her polling numbers are high, and Tudor Dixon isn't exactly this swing state nominee that we should expect in an environment which sure might benefit Republicans, but you're talking about coming down from a race where Whitmer won the last election by 10 points. Whitmer defeated Bill Schuette, flipped the state from red to blue by 10 percentage points. I get it. It was 2018. It was a good year for the Democratic Party, a great year, might I add. They lost seats in the Senate, but won control of the House. They won numerous races in the governor election, won Kansas, right? They won a bunch of them that were super important, Michigan included. But Joe Biden also won the state of Michigan. But the point is here, even with a good year for the Democratic Party, Gretchen Whitmer has a lot of room to fall. The Republicans are going to be the ones really clawing their way up here, trying to clinch onto any votes that they can get. And yet they chose a nominee who honestly isn't this palatable version of herself for centrist, independent, and swing voters. She did what she needed to win the nomination, and while she very well could pivot, a lot of the things that she had said are going to go ahead and come back ahead of this general election season. They're going to go ahead and be used to attack her, and I honestly don't see this race getting much better for the GOP, but it is still a swing state, so anything is really possible. I don't think we should be expecting a 15-point margin in favor of Gretchen Whitmer, as some of these polls are suggesting, but I could be convinced that she does win by something similar to 9.7%, 7-8%. These are things that I don't exactly see as entirely out of the ordinary. Previously, a year ago, I would have completely disagreed. I wouldn't have thought that Gretchen Whitmer was going to be able to win by the way she is expected to win today. But things change. A lot changes in a year. And you can see that in this forecast. You can see that in terms of the chances at victory for both parties. Unfortunately, Predicted has surpassed the 90 days. If anyone knows how to go beyond the 90 days, please let me know in the comment section down below. But what you'll find is that at a different point, about 4 or 5 months ago, the chances at victory for the Democratic Party were lower than the Republicans. Today, if we were to move them out to percentages, it'd be about 78% Democrats to 22% Republicans. Before, it was nearly the opposite at a different point in time. So to know that, to see that, and to see how far gone the GOP in the state of Michigan has gone in terms of losing support, in terms of losing candidates, it's quite extreme. And it seems to all be impacting them negatively. It was wrong from the beginning for James Craig and the rest. When they were disqualified, it was hard for the GOP to try to paint themselves out to be the party of election integrity, wanting to ensure and reduce fraud across the state when 5 of your candidates had fraudulent/illegitimate signatures. It completely ruined the credibility of those candidates, some of them including James Craig, who wanted to do a write-in campaign for the GOP primary. But it didn't work. It didn't work because their names have been tarnished. Their names alongside the Michigan Republican Party. Then came a new frontrunner. That frontrunner was arrested and raided by the FBI. Then Tudor Dixon comes in, gets the Trump endorsement, wins the nomination, and is probably one of the better GOP candidates, but I can't say she's good. I can't say she's that strong. A good/strong GOP candidate would be the favorite to win this race. This is a state that is easily won in a 2014-2010 national environment with the right candidate. Thing is, I don't think the GOP got it. I think Tudor Dixon was one of the better ones, but again, I don't think that she is this star-studded, amazing, phenomenal candidate for the GOP that is going to take the governor's mansion away from Gretchen Whitmer. I think she is the bottom of the barrel when the barrel goes even deeper than we thought. And that's the problem here. Tudor Dixon, individually speaking, might be strong in a Republican-leaning race, but this is not that. Whitmer is maintaining her level of popularity, maintaining her general election numbers, maintaining everything she needs to, including fundraising. While the GOP was scrambling at the last minute to choose a nominee, they ended up choosing one who has taken some very extreme choices on an issue that, especially last night, does not seem to be too popular for the pro-life people across the United States. We'll see what happens. This Republican nomination of Tudor Dixon does sort of solidify what we can expect for the general election. A lot can change over the next 98, 97 days, but I can't say that I expect it to change too much. I still think Whitmer will be the favorite unless something dramatically happens on the national level away from the Democratic Party, but as of right now, Democrats are still on track for victory in Michigan's governor race. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.